Welcome to episode 67 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today I'm interviewing a writer and photographer from Wisconsin who developed a side business after turning 50 because he wanted something different to do in addition to his career training police officers and correctional officers. Marty Drapkin lives near my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin, where he moved to get a master's degree in English education. Ultimately, he wound up working for the Wisconsin Department of Justice in a job responsible for coordinating training for people working in adult and juvenile corrections. Now 77 years old, Marty took up street photography when he was in his 50s, which involves shooting unposed, candid photos of people. What makes Marty's hobby interesting is that he still likes to use film and prints his pictures in black and white. Of all the subjects he likes to photograph, Marty has a desire to capture interactions with mothers and daughters of all ages. In fact, he published a book showcasing his best images. Marty fancied himself to be a writer starting when he was still a child. It's a skill he used professionally to author several books related to county jails. However, in his late 40s and early 50s, Marty started writing fiction books. He's published 4 books already and is working on a 5th. To tell us what prompted him to take up writing and photography as creative outlets, please welcome Marty Drapkin to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Marty. I really appreciate the time. Tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you got into Madison.
Okay, I'm glad to be here, Greg, and thank you for inviting me. I was born and raised in Milwaukee, went to high school there, and then also college as an undergraduate at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Then I came to Madison to get my master's degree in English education, hoping to be, or planning to be, a high school English teacher. But then I received a draft notice, and so I had to do 2 years of alternate service. Before then, by that time, I decided that I wasn't really interested in being a high school English teacher. So I pursued other avenues and did a couple of different things. But ultimately, I wound up in criminal justice field, specifically with a couple of different state agencies, and then mostly the Wisconsin Department of Justice I was a coordinator of the program in Wisconsin for training of county jail officers and certification of them, and also secure juvenile detention officers, people work in county secure juvenile detention facilities, mainly developing curriculum, writing training guides, instructional manuals, developing instructional materials, and that sort of thing. So I did that for my entire career and retired at 65, and I'm now 77, been happily retired for all that time. In terms of my wife and I, Erica, live out in Cross Plains, which is outside of Madison, about half an hour from downtown Madison. So we live in a very nice rural area, but which is accessible to the big city, or the medium-sized city, I should say, Madison, which has a lot to offer. Other than my work history, I've spent a lot of time doing 2 things: photography and also fiction writing, and also some nonfiction writing. So I've done a lot of writing, continue to do that, and I'm what's called a street photographer, which basically means doing candids of people in public places. And I shoot strictly in black and white, which I love very much, as opposed to color, and I still use film as opposed to digital. So I'm an old-fashioned photographer in some ways, but I've enjoyed doing that, my 2 passions, writing and photography, for many years, particularly since I retired. Where
do you find film today?
Oh, you can find film online through different suppliers, B&H and Adorama, things like that. And the film that I use is Ilford Film, which is a British film, and they've been very successful with that. So some films, you're correct, have gone bye-bye, but the ones that I use, and I don't really only use one, still remain. So I've been fortunate with that so far. But actually, film is making a resurgence as opposed to digital. So there's more demand for film, and therefore there's more supply of it now too.
A lot of that is coming back too. There's more demand for physical vinyl records than there has been in the past. So that's neat that people are still getting into that. Do you do your film development?
I used to, but because I'm shooting such quantities, I chose not to take the time to develop it myself, and I send it out to a lab. Actually, it's a lab in Georgia, yeah. And I certainly can develop my film, and that would be my preference, but it's just time consuming. So I do it otherwise.
Okay. How did you get started in writing?
I've been interested in writing since I was young. I used to write kind of various stories when I was a child, and I'm fortunate that I come from a family with creative genes, particularly on my mother's side, which helped me a lot. Probably a famous person in the family was a guy named Nat Hiken, and he was a writer, a comedy writer for various big-time show hosts, Jack Parr and that sort of thing. But he was most known for developing two very famous sitcoms in the late 50s and early 60s. One was called The Phil Silvers Show, but it was actually known as Sergeant Bilko more commonly. And then the other one was a sitcom, half-hour sitcom called Car 54, Where Are You? So he was, and then I had another cousin who was an actor in Broadway and elsewhere. I was just fortunate to have creative genes, and that's helped me a lot in both my fiction writing and in the photography that I do. I'm just lucky, been able to use what I've been given.
Have you done the writing after you retired from government service?
I did some nonfiction writing before I retired from government service. I basically wrote 3 books that have to do with county jail issues, and I dabbled in things, but I retired when I was 65, but I actually started becoming much more active in fiction writing. I've always wanted to do fiction writing, but I didn't get started when I was young. I was a little older. So actually in my late 40s and early 50s, I started writing fiction and done, as I say, 4 since, and I'm working on a 5th.
That's very good. Fiction writing is hard.
It is hard.
Easier to do nonfiction, I think, because all it involves is writing research and writing what you think. But fiction...
Well, I've enjoyed doing both for different reasons, but the fiction writing is very much a creative outlet for me, and I just love telling stories, writing good sentences, writing good paragraph, doing the research on it. So it's been an excellent experience for me, and I'm very privileged to have had that. The creative genes I think I have.
It's hard work, too, because to come up with fiction... Good fiction writing requires you to be very consistent in how the characters are presented, and you have to remember the details for how people were dressed and how they smiled and their little quirks the entire way through. You can't change details in the middle of the...
Oh, that's exactly right. I'm a very careful writer, so I've been able to deal with those issues, but you're exactly right. You have to be consistent.
Your initial degree was going to be in English, so it sounds like you like to do that kind of creativity most of your life.
Yeah, through high school and undergraduate and actually graduate school, it was in English, so I'm very much, but it's specifically in English education. That is to say, training you to become a high school English teacher.
Okay.
As opposed to a strictly English degree in which you're studying literature, per se. And so I thought that would be a nice thing to do, but I discovered that I didn't really have enough passion for teaching teenagers to devote a career to. That's okay. I was very happy with the education that I had, and very useful, and zero regrets. Like a lot of people, I just went in a different direction.
I give full credit to my 11th grade English teacher for seeing something in me that I didn't know existed, and he really drilled grammar into me. And once I mastered that, he's the guy who encouraged me to be more creative with my writing. So I owe my entire career, basically, to my 11th grade English teacher.
What was his or her name?
His name was Keith Larson, and he worked at La Follette High School in Madison.
Oh, there you go.
That's it.
You were fortunate, too.
That's right, exactly. You released a new book recently called 10 Nobodies, which sounds like a very interesting title because the subtitle is And They're Somebodies. Tell us about this book.
Actually, I'd written it some time ago, but it was just republished by my new publisher recently. So it's a book that I wrote some time ago. It was actually the second of the 4 books that I wrote. And it's fiction, 10 first-person narrative, 10 chapters, each of which is a first-person narrative by a quote-unquote nobody, a fictional nobody who worked for or otherwise served some famous person in history. So they're nobodies as opposed to famous people who are somebodies, so to speak. So the somebodies included William Shakespeare, and the title of that one was A Muse to William Shakespeare. Then the second one was about Anne Bonny, the 18th century pirate, who was quite an interesting person. And the quote-unquote nobody for that one was a former slave who had met up with her in South Carolina. and was her masseur and bedtime reader, because Anne Bonny was, in real life, was very fierce, but she was also an emotional wreck. Then other characters, quote unquote, somebodies, were Davy Crockett, the king of the wild frontier, General George Custer, Lewis Carroll, the writer, Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, and the nobody there was a little 10-year-old girl named Mimsy. Then there was President William Howard Taft, and there in that chapter I took off on, he was the heaviest president we ever had, and he never really wanted to be president. He became president because his wife nagged him into it, but his job was to be or his aspiration was to be on the U.S. Supreme Court, and specifically be Chief Justice, which eventually he did after he was president. So that was a fun chapter. And then did one on Marilyn Monroe, and then a local one on Vince Lombardi, the coach of the Green Bay Packers during 1962, which was one of their glory years. And then the final chapter was, somebody in that one was Meyer Lansky, the Jewish mobster who at that time was retired in his later years when he lived in Miami Beach. So that was a lot of fun to write. And it was really an outlet for creativity because I had different characters, and I developed personas for the quote-unquote nobody characters and had a lot of interplay with the somebodies. So that was a great deal of fun. So I really enjoyed writing that one.
What caused you to select the somebodies or the known characters that you did?
That's an interesting question. Part of it was just people who I was interested in. For example, I'm a huge Shakespeare fan. I was raised in the 1950s when Davy Crockett, the Walt Disney's Davy Crockett, was everywhere, and so I was a part of that too. I'm just interested in a lot of the characters. Lewis Carroll, big favorite of mine. Marilyn Monroe was always interesting, her life story, and became interested in Meyer Lansky, the gangster, after Godfather Part 2, in which the character of Hyman Roth, the older Jewish gangster, was supposedly based on Meyer Lansky. So that became it. So basically I just took a bunch of people that I was interested in anyway and developed fiction about them.
Did the nobodies influence the somebodies in some way? Is that part of the story?
Yes, not always in good ways. For example, the General Custer story, the nobody in that one was a middle-aged Cheyenne Indian woman who became General Custer's hairstylist. She was very good at cutting and styling hair from when she had been with the Crow Indians, for whom hair is very important. And so she worked for General Custer, and it was complicated. She was not only his hairstylist, but also his lover for 8 years. And then her daughter was also involved with Custer and had a baby by Custer. And there's actually some possibility that was true. But the way she influenced Custer was that just before the cavalry left for the Battle of Little Bighorn, he asked her to cut his hair because it was going to be hot and dusty out there. So he wanted to cut his hair short. And she knew that if he cut his hair short, he would lose his medicine, his power, and therefore would be defeated by the Indians. So that was her influence. And actually, she was based on a possibly real character, or her daughter, that is to say, was based on a real character that supposedly Custer did have an affair with. So I worked that in too. That was a lot of fun. And let's see, in the Shakespeare chapter, for example, my idea was to create an older character who was a muse to Shakespeare. It took place in the over a 3-year span between 1595 and 1597, during which was just before he wrote his really great plays, Hamlet and Macbeth and Othello and King Lear and the tragedies. And so his contribution to Shakespeare was to come up with quotes that Shakespeare then later used in his plays, particularly the tragedy, and specifically insults. One of the things that Shakespeare was just absolutely wonderful for was his very creative insults. So my idea in this story was that this guy would teach Shakespeare how to use insults very well. So those sorts of things.
That's neat. That's what I like about fiction writing, is because there are no rules, really. You can create your own worlds and you can do your own thing. And so just take an idea and run with it. Have you always had a publisher, or were you self-publishing for a while?
I was self-published through a company based in Indiana at first, then they went under. So I found what's called a hybrid publishing company in Milwaukee. A hybrid is between self-publishing and traditional publishing. That's but I'm very happy with it. It's a small company run by a very wonderful woman, And I'm very glad to be working with a local company. The other one, I never actually met anybody. It was just far away, but I'm not a well-known author at all. So I've had to self-publish, meaning I pay for the production of it, but then I own the copyright and I get a share of profits, which has never been very great. But I've never really made much money from my writing, but it's a passion. It's just something I love to do.
Mm-hmm. And why is it so passionate for you? What is it about writing that really trips your trigger?
With both my writing and my photography, it's just a creative outlet, and I can't do much else. I can't build a cabinet or do a stock car driving or nothing along those lines. But creative stuff does come easily to me, so it's important for me to be able to have outlets for my creativity. And both my photography and my fiction writing, have done that for me in slightly different ways. But I just love the product. I love the process and the product. Here's my book, 10 Nobodies, for example. So now I have this book that I wrote and that I had every part in writing. And so it was a way to use my creativity and to create a product that I like. It's wonderful to have a book that you wrote and to look at it and feel proud of your work. So that's something I feel. But I feel the same way about my photography. To produce an image is a wonderful thing.
When did you take up photography?
My father died young at 54, and he had been a photographer, but he never really had much time to do it to the extent that he wanted to. So I inherited his camera stuff and took it up and found I enjoyed it and was very good at it. And I was a wedding photographer for a while, and I liked that in its own way. And I've done a little bit of commercial stuff, but the great thing for me has just been to do my own stuff, which, as I mentioned, is street photography. So what I've done is in warmer weather, spring, summer, and fall, I go to mostly around Madison, street festivals, farmers markets, art fairs, public dances. We have what's called the Dane dances every Friday night in August. And I just take candid pictures of people, and I become it's called street photography. I've become very good at it, doing it in a way that doesn't get people's attention. But I love the product of it, just people being people. And what is always fascinating to me is that I've been able to, this particular photography, I've been able to capture human moments, two people interacting in some way that are there, and then that moment is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Gone, and I'm able to memorialize it with my camera and make a print and also have digital images. In other words, I scan the negatives and then make digital images on the computer. It's just very satisfying. Both of my creative outlets are just very satisfying in terms of just the process of doing it, the writing, going out and taking photographs, and then editing them, going through software programs on the computer to make them perfect, and then making a print of them on my printer. It's just very satisfying to me in every aspect of it.
Have you published any of your photos?
Yes, I have been a winner in several contests in major magazines that have won awards. And then I did one book so far. Let me show you. It was one book I did, Mothers and Daughters. So photographing mothers and daughters has been one of the main things that I've done over the years. I used to do posed pictures of mothers and daughters, people I knew or people I met. And now I don't do that so much. I mostly do candid photos. So it's not somebody I know, but it's in a public place, so it's okay to do.
So you don't have a studio at all? You do everything outdoors?
Yes.
Madison, there are a lot of wonderful places to be outdoors. You've got a zoo where you can interact with people, the downtown area for the farmers market, where every Saturday where people are gathered around the square. Very popular. Thousands of people down there. It's just, and then Madison is unique in all of the unique festivals that it have scheduled throughout the year. So I can see plenty of opportunity for that. Have you gotten into any trouble from somebody who's like, why are you taking my picture?
Just once a guy objected to my taking his picture because he had the idea that I was stealing his soul.
Oh,
something. So, I didn't argue with him. I just said, I understand how you feel, and walked away. And that's just, but no, I've been maybe lucky that I've had very few instances where anybody objected or even noticed that I was taking their picture, for that matter.
It's probably not as bad if you're photographing adults than photographing children. That might.
Well, that's an interesting thing. I've been doing this for many years, And photographing children is something that has become more touchy in recent years because people, with the advent of computers and that sort of thing, people have been taking images of children and then posting them and not always such nice ways. So I'm much more cautious to take pictures of children by themselves. I'll take pictures of children with their parents and occasionally children by themselves. But you raise an excellent point, and it's a much more touchy thing now than it used to be. So that's one thing I'm very careful of.
Do you have to get
not that I would ever misuse an image of anybody, but I can understand completely how parents feel about people taking pictures of their children without permission.
Do you have to get permission from people to take their pictures? No, because it's all in public, right? Right.
In a public place, you can do it.
Okay.
That's legal. There's also ethical issues about which people could argue is how ethical is it to be taking a picture of somebody without their permission. I struggle with that, but express my creativity generally wins out over other ethical concerns.
So you were a wedding photographer as well.
Yes, I particularly enjoyed the receptions when everything is looser and people are just relaxed and it's not formal and all that kind of stuff. I'm a people person, so I just enjoyed doing it. But the real thrill for me was, my point of view is that it's the bride's day. It's both of their days, but it's the bride's day. And to take a lot of pictures that the bride would really like on her special day, for some sentimental reason, just appealed to me. So that's probably the main thing I liked about being a wedding photographer. The other thing that helped, that was a benefit to my wedding photography, is the last book I published, which was called Poor Tom. My main character was, among other things, an assistant wedding photographer. So I was able to incorporate in that book stories of the weddings I'd done. In other words, things that actually happened, and then I wrote about them as fictional weddings. And that was good, because most of them were not disasters, but sometimes close to disasters. And that was fun too.
As a self-publisher, working with a hybrid company, does that mean you have to get involved in the book layout or anything like that, or you just hand over a manuscript?
Book the layout too. I worked with a friend of mine to have the covers of all my books designed by him, and I wrote the blurbs on the back and that sort of thing. Yeah, it's more than just giving a manuscript. It's involved in all aspects of it. Marketing, which as a self-publisher you have to do yourself, and that's one of the things I'm not good at. So that's why I haven't had many sales. I've had some nice sales and been okay, but because I'm not good at marketing, it's been.
Have you gotten any feedback from people who've read your books?
Oh yeah, sure, very nice. I've had several reviews done by different reviewers, and so I've gotten very positive feedback among the people who've read it. Some nice Amazon reviews and Kirkus reviews, which is a big one, and other ones. So yes, I've gotten very good feedback.
What kind of marketing have you had to do to sell your books?
I have a publicist, so she sends out press releases to newspapers and that sort of thing. And then depending on the book, the subject nature of the book, I've done kind of specific marketing. For example, I wrote a book called The Cat Tender, which is about a 27-year-old woman with a variety of issues, but her profession is that she takes care of cats in people's houses while they're gone. And I knew about this because I have a friend who does just that. Mm-hmm. So I basically interviewed her, found out about what she does, and incorporated that in the book. But it was a lot of cat stories. So there I tried to focus in on cat audiences. So I developed postcards with the cover on it on one side and the information about the book on the other side. And I've taken it to veterinarians' offices and cat clinics specifically and pet stores around the area. And I don't know how successful that's been, but at least it's reaching out to a specific audience in that way. Another one was that my book, Poor Tom, was very much based on Shakespeare. The idea of it is that the main character, the narrator, is the son of a famous classical actor. And he's waited all of his life to do what he considers to be his ultimate role, playing King Lear, Shakespeare's King Lear. And then after it's done, he's going to retire. So now the play is done, and he feels that he failed, and his whole world falls apart, and he degenerates like King Lear did in the play. So it's a father and son book. Because it was largely based on Shakespeare, I tried to reach out to some Shakespeare audiences, putting ads in like a Shakespeare Quarterly or other magazines like that, and so on. In at least a few cases, I've tried to reach out to the specific audiences, and I've had my publicists reach out to specific organizations too. So, for example, this book I mentioned, Poor Tom, the father and the son that I mentioned are both Jewish. There's a lot of Jewish stuff in there, and several scenes that take place in Jewish delis. So my publicist and I tried to reach out to specifically Jewish newspapers and publications and that sort of thing to reach that audience. So it's a combination of general and specific audiences that you try to reach out to.
Did you have to take any special training or classes before you could start publishing books?
I took one writing class in college. That was all.
Okay.
I've studied books about writing and that sort of thing, but I feel confident enough in my skills that I don't feel I've had to have a lot of special training. No, I've had no special training in photography. It's all self-taught.
Mm-hmm. How did you find your publisher and your publicist?
The publicist I got from my new publisher in Milwaukee. She gave me the names of a couple publicists, and I reached out to them and was able to hook up with one. So that's how I got that. With my publisher, with the first publisher I had, which was called Dog Ear Press in Indianapolis, if I remember correctly, I got that because I read a book that ranked all the self-publishing companies or the main self-publishing companies in the country, and that was one of the highly ranked ones. So that's how I got that. And then with the one I'm with now, a friend of mine had published a book through them, and she told me about them, and I thought a local publisher might be nice. I tried that, and it worked out well because I've been able to have a personal relationship with the woman who runs the company, I should say, in a way that I never had with the first publisher. So that's very nice. And actually, the company that I work with now, they have a fiction imprint, but mostly what she does is do memoirs. So a lot of her authors are memoir writers.
Did your writing or photography create any challenges for you that required some special attention or creativity to resolve?
I think I've had the creativity all along. I didn't have to foster that. The business aspects of it are mostly fiction writing, create a little bit of a challenge for me because it doesn't come naturally to me. There's all kinds of things that people who know what they're doing urge authors to do to develop a platform and all that sort of thing. And I'm just not good at it. And I haven't devoted as much time to that as I probably should have. So I guess that would be one of the challenges. So that's something I've had to learn about. But the actual processes, the creative processes for writing and photography, I really haven't felt that I had to learn a great deal.
Fair enough.
I'm fortunate that I've had the talent.
If you had to start over again, is there anything you would do differently?
No, my career I was very satisfied with. I slipped into this career through the back door because of connections, and I had no experience in corrections or law enforcement, but I found I was very adept at doing what they needed to do, which was being a good writer of training manuals and running meetings. And I really enjoyed what I did. I got to work with a lot of police people and corrections people, and I loved them, and they liked and respected me. So that was great. I wouldn't change a thing about that. I consider myself very fortunate to have done what I did. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't change anything about that. The only thing I could think of is that with my writing, I wish I would have started a little bit earlier than I did. So I didn't start until I was still working, but probably in my late 40s, around 50, started doing that. So I wish I would have started that a little bit earlier. And the only regret I have with my photography is when I was younger, let me back up and say that as a photographer, I do all street photography, but divide my photographs into three categories. One is sort of general street photographs. The other is photographs of women. And the third is mothers and daughters. I've always been real interested in photographing mothers and daughters. And I've done a lot of it, and I've done what I think is some very good work. But the one thing I wish I had done, as I look back on it differently, is I had the idea to do pose portraits of mothers and daughters at intervals. So here's a mother and daughter when the daughter's very young. Mm-hmm. Then 3 years later, 4 years later, 5 years later, here they are again in the same spot. And so I didn't realize I would live as long as I have so that I could develop a collection. But I would have liked to have done that with however many, 25, 50 mothers and daughters, whether a mother and one daughter or a mother and several daughters or 3 generations, and been able to have that kind of a collection over the year.
That would
So,
be fun. Hmm.
yeah, it would be very meaningful. And my idea was to create a separate little book for each one, because it's easy to publish photo books these days at not terribly great expense. And that's something I wish I would have done. And that's the only thing I can think of, though, that I would categorize as a regret.
Do you have any advice for people over the age of 50 on how to identify or pursue their passions?
As to the pursue part of it, I guess I would just go off of my case. I found two things that I really enjoyed and really got a lot of satisfaction from. And I was vigilant enough at pursuing those that it gave me satisfaction. If I were to give advice to anybody, it would be to, if once they have identified something that they really feel passionate about, they really enjoy, to do it, despite what anybody else may say about whether it's a good idea or not. I think I know people who want to do something, but for whatever reason have been discouraged from doing it, from when they're young to when they're teenagers to when they're older. People say you're no good, or this won't make you money, or whatever it may be. And if I were to give any advice, it would be to ignore anybody who says anything negative or discouraging about what it is you feel passionate about, as long as what you feel passionate about is legal and that sort of, and pursue it despite what anybody else says about it. Because you only live once, and the one thing you want to avoid is looking back toward the end of your life and saying, I wish I would have done this. I was really interested in this, but for whatever reason I didn't. So
regret is a killer.
That's the only advice I can think of.
Yeah, regret's a killer for a lot of people. And
it really is.
We have talked to a number of folks who had felt called to do things like writing very early in their life, but were talked out of it by well-meaning friends and relatives who told them they needed to do more practical things. Now, when you're over 50 and you're retired, that is an ideal time to get back into that, because you were created for that kind of thing. You were given this gift of creativity. So I'm glad to see that you're pursuing it.
Yeah, thank you. And I guess just to expand on that, I think that all of us have obligations in life to other people, family members, extended family members, making money, whatever it may be. So life is filled with spending a lot of time doing your duty. But as you suggest, I think it is sad when people, in addition to doing their duty, have things that they want to do, whatever it may be, a creative endeavor or volunteer work or something else that they would find fulfilling. But it's too easy to push what you want to do to the bottom of the pile of how you spend your time. And then, as you say, or as I said, it's sad for a lot of people to have to look back at their lives and say, I wish I had done something differently that I wanted to do. And maybe that's particularly true of women. I don't know, but I think that, no.
No, it applies to men as well. Yep.
Okay. I'll accept that.
How can people get in touch with you if they'd like to connect with you?
I'm on Facebook under Marty Drapkin, and I have, should I share that?
Sure, if you'd like.
GWGJAILS, GWG Jails at Chorus, CHORUS.net. So if anybody wanted to get hold of me through, that's fine. I also have a website for both for my photography and my fiction writing. For photography, it's www.drapkinphotography.com. And for my fiction, it's www.drapkinbooks.com websites.
That's easy enough to remember.
Sure.
Super. Thank you very much for sharing your story with us today. I'm impressed that you've published so many books and that you've combined a love for writing and photography and publishing books. That's unusual. Yeah. So good for you for doing that.
And the thing I'm looking forward to now is I have one more fiction book I have started working on and then I want to write. And then I want to do 3 photo books, publish 3 photo books of my photography in the 3 categories, one in each of the 3 categories that I mentioned: women, mothers, and daughters, and which I've already done a preliminary copy of, and then just general street photographs. And I want to do that as a legacy, so that however long I have yet to live, they'll be there. And then after I'm gone, I'll have actual physical things that are a legacy of my creative work.
Do you have children?
I have one adult daughter who lives in Seattle.
In Seattle. Very good.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Thank you again for your time. I really appreciate it, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much, Greg. It was a pleasure to talk to you.
As a former professional photographer and lifelong writer myself, I really enjoyed speaking with Marty Drapkin about his love for photography and writing. Although he's published fiction and nonfiction books, it is the creative aspect of writing fictional stories that really motivates him to write. His most recent book is one he wrote years ago that was recently re-released. Titled 10 Nobodies and Their Somebodies, it is a first-person account of individuals who worked with or encountered a famous person and influenced the direction of his or her life in some way. Marty admits he hasn't made a lot of money from his books, but he loves to write them because he knows others will be entertained or helped in some way. The creative process comes easy to Marty, and he believes having an outlet for his creativity contributes to a more purposeful life now that he's in his late 70s. He also likes the sense of accomplishment he receives from holding a physical copy of a book he has written. When it comes to photography, Marty describes himself as a people person. Photographing people as they interact with others is just a fun way to capture a moment in time. Marty admits he wishes he had started writing earlier because he finds it so enjoyable and his mind is filled with ideas about things he can write about. In photography, he wishes he had started taking pictures of mothers and daughters many years ago and then re-photographed them regularly as they got older. He believes, and I agree, that would have been a fun and interesting photo collection. People can connect with Marty by email at gwgjales@chorus.net, as well as on Facebook. People can check out his photography by visiting www.drapkinphotography.com or learn more about his books at www.drapkinbooks.com. His books are available for sale on Amazon and can be ordered at other bookstores too. That's all I have for this week's show. If you'd like help in identifying a purpose for your life or helping in planning your next steps, I'm offering a complimentary brainstorming session to members of the Forward from 50 Facebook community. For details, connect with me on Facebook or visit www.forwardfrom50.com. I'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like the show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.